time in this country, a long time ago, when reading wasn't just for fags, and neither was writing. People wrote books and movies that had stories, so you cared whose ass it was and why it was farting, and I believe that time can come again.
Welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. I'm Caitlin, your host, and joining Matthew McGowan. Matthew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You know, not too bad. It's been a crazy few days, but I'm glad the weekend's over and settling down and finally doing the podcast. Also joining us, Matt has finally decided after a year to come back on the podcast and grace us with his presence. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. You came back for the perfect episode. Reluctantly talking about everyone's favorite topic lately, abortion.
It'll probably be the most civil abortion podcast there ever was.
I agree. I think we all places, like, we're not trying to tear each other down. So I definitely think this is going to be a really civil conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
Before we get into the moral and, I'm going to talk about the bad arguments that we've seen. I don't know if it's the same for everyone, but my feed on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram has just been dominated by abortion posts lately. It's all I can see. I can't enough. You can't escape it if you're on social media.
Why would you want to hide them? Aren't they fun?
When it's just the same terrible argument over and over, like, I was just like, I literally cannot see another abortion post, or I'm Facebook. So I was just hiding them one after another. And then I realized that I had spent 20 minutes hiding posts and I wasn't seeing anything else.
It's hilarious.
What are some bad arguments that you guys have seen?
I actually have a neighbor who, to the effect of trying to compare a fetus to, and this was from the pro-choice perspective, trying to compare a fetus to a person who was brain dead, and basically saying that once there's no person, and that the plug could be pulled by the family, so why can't a mother pull the plug? But what he failed to realize is that it instantly opened his own position up for the argument, like, okay, does that mean that we're going to have G's done to fetuses before women can abort? And it's just, like, hilarious to watch people, like, try to come up with arguments to help themselves, and they hurt their own case. Not that I agree with forced surgical anything, but
no, and that's what a do. Like, they're either self-defeating, they're circular reasoning, they're just absolutely asinine. One of my favorites, it's actually been going around quite a bit lately, is, isn't it weird how everyone who is pro-abortion
Okay.
like, what big brain moron
Way to
came up
enter
with
the
that?
conversation.
Like, are you really trying to, like, have a gotcha moment with that?
well, what do you think of the only women can have?
Oh, I fully disagree with that.
Here, so.
I fully disagree with that. That's actually another one of the arguments I wanted to bring up, is your opinion on abortion isn't valid because you're a man. It's still valid. Like, you can't.
Doesn't that require gender anyway? Which is 2019. We can't really do that.
It may be a joke, but, like, that's actually kind of an issue in the trans community right now. A lot of trans people are being told that their opinion, and they're like, well, look, I'm biologically female, so I can still technically get pregnant if they're, pre-op, and they're being told that their opinion doesn't matter if they're a trans man. And it's kind of gone into this super murky.
I didn't even think of it in that sense. That's not even. Yeah, that's crazy. That's weird.
Yeah. So these empty platitudes of your opinion on abortion isn't valid because you're a man. It's like, well, you have to think of the implications of that. For trans inclusiveness, you have to keep that in mind when you're making these platitudes on abortion.
Again, I didn't even mean in trans inclusionist way. I meant, like, as in when that headlines immediately read a bunch of white male senators, and like people like pointed out that it's always like men trying to fucking take away women's rights. But I'll get in a conversation and I'll be told like, oh well, I don't have just whatever I have to say, it doesn't matter. And the funny thing is, I'm not even like pro-life in a political sense either, so it's weird that I get like yelled at for that.
No, everyone gets yelled at. It's pretty ridiculous.
If you have a divergence of opinion, you get the day. If you don't agree with my stance, your opinion's invalid. So.
That's pretty much how political discourse in any topic is these days. You have to toe the party line or you're out.
It's on steroids on this topic for sure.
Definitely. Being able to have opinion because you're a man, or it's the rich white men are pushing this to control women. I don't buy that completely. Just because, especially in Alabama, you know, the governor is a woman. She's the one who signed the bill into law over and are pro-life. It's a pretty even split on the ideological, moral, and political scenes. It's pretty evenly split between pro-life and pro-choice. So it's not just a woman's issue. I mean, yes, it does come down to women's reproductive rights, or however you want to frame that, but it's not just a woman's issue. It doesn't just concern women. You know, men are affected by this too. So everyone is entitled to their opinion, whether you take that opinion to heart because of their gender. I'm not saying that you have to listen to every opinion from every man about abortion, but they are allowed to have an opinion.
Right on.
What about you, Matthew? What bad arguments have you seen?
I think that one of the worst arguments that I see is when, you know, they make it off like, well, people are just cavalierly having abortions, and, you know, it's like this easy decision for a woman to, you know, just, she's going to get pregnant and she's going to have an abortion and she's going to go on about it. Know anybody that's ever actually had one, because every single person I know that's had an abortion, it's a struggle. You know, it's a tough decision for people, and people make it for a variety of reasons. I'm not saying that there aren't possibly willy-nilly have an abortion and it's not a big thing, but it's far from the norm.
There's so many situations that can lead to a woman seeking an abortion that you can't generalize them all into just being whores who consequences. Like, that's just super reductionist, first of all.
Or that it's an easy decision. It's a very difficult decision.
It is.
You know, and people have it for reasons that are beyond the understanding of anybody not making that decision. Any valid makes when they turn to that argument, for me, it's gone. You just wiped it out.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that, actually. The women are only mad about the abortion ban because they want to be whores, or they want to go out and hoe around, or hold, but they can't be accountable. You know, even though that may describe some of them, and up to, I think it was 75% of abortions are elective, you don't know the reasoning behind all of them.
Right.
And when it comes to bans, majority reason is it's about those outlying cases that would still be affected. Generalizing all of this is just damaging to your side of the argument. It's damaging for everyone involved because it doesn't lead to any kind of production about the core issues behind abortion. So just, you know, calling women whores, I think you might have other issues with women if that's your go-to argument for being pro-life.
Right. You know, and I know we're going to cover this later, but there's so many good ways that you can get your message across to start attacking somebody and calling them a whore because you believe that this is just some easy decision that people make. The only people that are going to listen to you are the people in your echo chamber. Mm-hmm. And yeah, what do you and in fact, you've made me think that you're an idiot who isn't to be taken seriously, and congratulations. You
see a lot of that on both sides of it. I've actually gotten more mad at pro-choicers than I have with pro-lifers, and that's
no, I get it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I've seen so many bad pro-choice arguments, and they're just like, if you can't make your argument and have it hold true no matter what you do to it, so you can't change a couple words in it and make it it has to hold up. It has to be built on solid information to make it a good argument. And you're just not seeing hardly any of that. And nobody's talking about the legal effects of bans. They're just talking about, well, white, or making these really great leaps and assumptions on these arguments and assuming the positions of the other side just to dunk on them. Nobody cares about honest discourse anymore. It's just about dunking on the other side and get shared a lot.
Yep. That's political discourse in a nutshell.
Yeah. And one that I saw that really kind of struck me as hypocritical on the left side of things, or the pro-choice. If your girlfriend or daughter was raped, would you want her to carry around the rapist baby for 9 months? Now, this right here is validating the notion that men can control women and their actions. And that's exactly what, feminists and pro don't want men to control us. But framing the question in this way, would you want your daughter to carry around the rapist baby? How about it's her choice? Because that's what this is about, is choice.
Right.
So you can't frame it to where a man, you're not changing anyone's perspective with this. You're just reinforcing the notion that men can control women and their decisions.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of this where they're just tearing their own side down. And this whole abortion debate lately is just really, really disheartening. And I can't stress enough how important it is to be intellectually honest in your arguments and to not go into it trying to be a dick.
Agreed.
So unless everyone has, you're probably all aware the reason we're bringing up these bad arguments and why abortion is such a hot topic lately is because of these heartbeat abortion laws that have been introduced in Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Missouri, Michigan, others lately. They've been just kind of going like dominoes. But what I've seen is a lot of misconceptions about these bills, and it's led to a lot of really nasty discourse. So I wanted to clear up some of the misconceptions bills, at least Alabama and Georgia and Texas, so we can get the right information out from the start. So when it comes to Alabama, there are no exceptions for rape and incest, and the only exception is for serious will not be prosecuted from the Alabama bill. This is something that I've seen a lot of people saying, is that the women are going to be prosecuted. We're going to be throwing 16-year-olds in jail, that women shouldn't be punished for their choices. And while I agree with Alabama at all, it's only the doctors that are performing the procedure. Abortion would be a Class A felony under this bill, punishable by up to 99 years in prison.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's crazy. I didn't know it was targeting the doctor. That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't like the abortion bill at all, and I think it's way too restrictive. I think any abortion bill is way too restrictive.
It's horrible, in my opinion, anyway.
Right. I'm glad that the women aren't targeted in this one. But 99 years in... Are you kidding me?
For a medical procedure.
For a medical procedure. So those are some of the misconceptions with the Alabama bill. So it is just the doctors being prosecuted, not the women. However, 99 procedure is just asinine. And
now,
when it comes
have other states done that where they will charge the doctors instead of the women? I think I've ever heard of that before.
Other countries do that. It really depends on the country. There's some that prosecute the doctors. There's some that prosecute the...
Well, I meant in the U.S.
Oh, in the U.S., there have been a lot of heartbeat bills introduced. There have been a lot of sneaky abortion bans introduced to try and challenge Roe v. Wade. But every single one of them gets shot down in appellate court or courts, stuff like that. It's never enforced.
Sorry for the 20 questions. I'd rather know what.
No, and these are good. It's good to get these questions out because it's a lot of things that people don't really ask, and they don't have the informed opinions, or they're not engaging in discourse with all of the information. And that's kind of what we wanted to do this week, is give people as much information as possible to inform their own opinions on this. Like, I'm not going to tell people what to think. And that's not going to change. I don't expect everyone else's moral position to change, but we're a political podcast, so I would like to maybe change some minds or open some minds up to the political position that we have.
Conversation without cutting each other's throats out.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to Georgia, this was the first of the heartbeat bills in this last round of heartbeat bills to be introduced. This is the one that kind of sparked all the outrage. It's the one that strike over, and it's been kind of swept under the rug now with Alabama. But I find that Georgia's is even worse than Alabama. It's known as the fetal heartbeat bill, and it effectively bans abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected on a sonogram. 6 weeks gestation. Governor Kemp calls it a common sense legislation in that, quote unquote, even a preschooler can tell that a fetus is a baby. Perhaps we shouldn't be using preschooler logic and reasoning legislation.
These same people that would support this were up in arms when David Hogg and all the kids were talking about gun control.
Yeah.
So it's really funny to make that. I'm sorry, but that's what I got out of that.
Well, yeah. Using preschooler logic as a kind of justification for this common sense legislation, which is funny because that's what people call the gun control legislation, which Republicans seem to hate.
So simple. A kid could understand it, right?
Maybe
This
we
should
should
have
stop
definitely-
using children's logic as a benchmark for legislation.
That was definitely one of the bad arguments too. Even just insinuating that this is all settled science and everybody knows exactly when life begins.
When the settled science is still pretty contested within scientific circles. I mean, there's scientific facts, but how you interpret those facts is not settled. It's not concrete.
And consider
really
there are
depends on your
probably
moral-
legit smarter than us that argue with each other about this same topic. So
Right, and it's the same as when people get in these really deep philosophical arguments. Like, these are things that have been debated for thousands of years. Do you really think two dudes on the internet solve all of life's problems and all of life's questions? No.
well, have you seen our group chat? Or my
Our group chats do get pretty philosophical. It's great. Back to Georgia legislation. This bill would take, and unlike Alabama, it does include exceptions for rape and incest, but only if a police report is filed and proof can be obtained.
Wow.
This is where I have a problem, because all across the country you have hundreds of thousands of. You're not going to
yeah,
get.
so proof could be obtained if the cops aren't doing your job. And having to go to the police anyway to force them to have to report it could,
That could be
in
a
some
dangerous
situations,
situation for a lot of
endanger their life.
Absolutely.
If you're in an abusive situation, that can lead to more problems. And a lot of people will say this is a straw man. And normally I'm totally against the whole straw man fallacies being used. But when it comes to abortion legislation, like not the moral argument, but the aspect, this is the only case that I can see where straw mans are part of the main conversation. They are relevant because when it comes to sweeping legislation, it's those outlying cases that are affecting victims. Yes, you're going to have the majority of people who are just inconvenienced by it, but it's those people that are on the outside of the main reasons for this, that the people who are in abusive situations, the rape victims, pregnancies, and yes, while they make up a fraction of 1% of cases, there's still instances where these legislative bans are going to affect them and put them even more danger. So this is where it's actually relevant, and that's kind of an unpopular opinion, but I'm definitely going to hold my ground on that because these outlying cases are absolutely important.
I'm with you on that.
Yep.
Now, as for criminal punishment in Georgia, the bill is relative. Providers can receive 10 years in prison, but for the mothers, it's unclear whether they will be held liable in a court of law, and a lot of it is left to interpretation due to the vagueness of the bill when it comes to prosecution. Some have actually expressed their opposition to these heartbeat bans as too extreme.
I think those groups see it as harmful to their cause. Politicians, they do things like this for their own ends, but if you're in an advocacy group and you're really trying to pro-life perspective, you can look at these bills and see that they're so extreme that it's going to turn people off to your rational arguments, because they're going to be like, dude, locking a doctor in prison for 99 years for a procedure that may have been as a result or whatever is you lose any moral ground to make an argument. So these advocacy groups who actually are out there doing work trying to help people are like, hey, wait a minute, you're hurting us. I think that's the case anyway.
Right. Woman who's seeking an abortion and call her a murderer or threaten her with jail time and think that she's going to change her mind. And that's what a lot of these pro-life groups do is they have their clinics, they have their support groups or whatever, and they minds through love and education and being open-minded and helping people through other ways. Like, they're not going out there and screaming at people. I mean, some of them do when it comes to the protests, but when it comes to dealing with people who are they're very welcoming, and they're not going to get the results they want if lawmakers are out here threatening people with jail time. Do you think any women are going to seek help from pro-life groups or seek help from change their mind if they can't be open about their intentions? If they can't go into one of these groups and say, hey, I'm thinking about getting an abortion, because they could go to jail. It's just like with, the drug war. Addicts are scared to go get help. It's going to be the same with abortion.
Well, and I think there's genuine resentment to the politicians in these, because I don't know the background necessarily in other states, but I know here in Ohio, they just passed a similar bill. And it's funny because the governor got into office in January. He's done nothing but raise taxes. And it was starting to draw the ire of the conservative groups that Republicans need to get elected. And then bam, out of nowhere, there's this really big restrictive abortion. So politically, it's great. Yeah, it's great politically, but if you're right to life or whatever, and you're really trying to stop this for reasons that are genuine and pure, and you see this kind of bill, it harms your cause, and you're like, you know what? Fuck you guys, man. Fuck you politicians. You're hurting us with legislation like this. Yep. You're hurting our cause.
Now, I saved the best state for last, Texas. Their heartbeat bill was introduced by Representative Tinderholt. He says he's a firm believer that God creates children in his own image, regardless of how that child is brought into the world. It's created in his image, and how can... Now, this bill opens up women for criminal prosecution for murder, leaving the death penalty as an option. There are no exceptions for rape and incest, and the doctors aren't prosecuted. It's the women.
Wow.
To express how morally and disgustingly detestable this is.
That is savage.
That's like the same Sharia law. They're all
yeah, exactly. Nailed it.
Savage fucking.
Yeah, they're actually, and I think that's hilarious.
That's fun.
So getting back to the Texas bill, it's been introduced a couple times before, but it's never gotten this far. And it's about to pass the Senate, I believe. It already went through the House. It's about to pass the Senate. It opens up women for the death penalty. And that's not okay at all.
No.
I'm not going to make the comparison that, how can you be pro-life and be pro-death penalty? Because I think that kind of takes away from your argument that the fetus... I think that's just another one of those bad arguments. But it does beg the question of where are their priorities here? If the argument is that all life is equally precious and you come from the pro-life camp, how is putting women to death you value life equally? It seems that more value is placed on the fetus's life in this instance, if you're willing to go as far as potentially opening up thousands of women per year to a possible death sentence. If that's where you're placing that value, is more value on the fetus's life, I feel like there could be some self-reflection there that maybe that's not the most morally sound position. I don't know. Texans for Life, which is a Russian lobbyist group, has expressed their opposition to this bill. So this is another one where all the pro-life groups are saying, no, you cannot do this. This is ridiculous. We won't support it. So even anti-abortion groups agree that unfortunately, the bill is in danger of actually passing and getting signed into law. And that's really terrifying that could pass. And obviously, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. It's going to go to all the different levels of court, and it will get. I do not expect that this would ever be enforced, but to even think that that could make it through House and Senate of a state house, that's just disgusting to me. That there are hundreds of people willing to sign off on that. It really makes you question the.
Well, and it also makes you question your fellow man, because they're obviously appealing to someone, and I want to know who the hell they're appealing to so I can stay the fuck away from them. I mean, that's their Sharia law right there that they're trying to impose their own version of. Mm-hmm. I can't even wrap my mind around the thought process that makes you arrive at, hey, this is a great idea, let's back this.
Yeah. And now laws have been blocked by federal judges. That's the first step in the long legal battle to get the legislation in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. States can then appeal the decision, and if they're denied again, they can submit another appeal to the Supreme Court if they want to take the case. Now, for conservative lawmakers interested in overturning or eroding abortion access, this appellate path is the only way to substantively chip away at Roe v. Wade, which is protected by the U.S. Constitution. They're doing it. You know, they're creating these just outrageous bills and getting them passed and then fighting in court and then hoping to get one or two of the amendments or one or two of the restrictions to hold up.
Not only that, that they fought for life and that they fought against the evil federal judges. So, it's a political win.
Yeah. For the people claiming to be for small government, because it's not small government at all.
No, this is an expansion of government power. No matter your moral position on abortion, you should see that these bills are just, they're way too far. This is just not going to have a good effect on anybody or have the desired outcome. So getting right into, what we talked about before about having different moral and political positions, that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize that you can have, is that you can be morally pro-life or political position. Usually there aren't very many politically pro-life and morally pro-choice people, but there is that compromise, basically. You compromise with a politically pro-choice position, life position. It's not incompatible to have.
No, not at all. I think that honestly defines me. I'm morally, I want to see life anywhere that I can see it. I appreciate the sanctity of it. Largely anti-death penalty for that very reason. But at the same time, I realize that my morality is not everybody else's, and that reasonable people can disagree on this subject, and the ability to do so if their moral center tells them that this is the best thing for me, then it ain't my place to judge them, man. And I certainly don't want to restrict it and make it unsafe. Exactly.
Abhorrent to hold a morally pro-choice position, because you have to realize that morally pro-choice people may not believe that life begins at conception. They don't have the same belief data in a different way. So it's not like those who say that they're morally pro-choice are just okay with murder. That's kind of a lot of the arguments I've seen, is that people think, they come from a place where they think abortion is murder and life being conception. So those who are morally pro-choice are obviously just morally okay with murder. They don't view it as murder. They don't view it as a fully formed human being. I think I'm someone who is morally pro-choice. That a fetus or an embryo or a zygote or blastocyst or whatever stage in early development it is, I don't believe that is a fully formed human being that's equal to a grown person. But I don't want to impose that on other people. I don't want to tell other people that they're wrong for their beliefs. I don't see it as a political issue.
See, I agree with you to an extent. I don't think it's a fully formed person. I do think life begins, my concept of life. For a long time, I was adamantly pro-life. I just thought abortion was like super fucking gross and cringy, and I don't know. But it wasn't until I was already like learning other aspects. But I did eventually realize that like I don't think that I can be consistent with all of my other beliefs and agree that the government should be able to enforce. I don't like it, no matter how much I don't like it. And don't get me wrong, like if an abortion shop moved next to me, I probably would want to leave there. Like, I don't know, it just would be fucking weird to me. But I don't think that we should be killing people saying it at all. And all it's going to do is make the matter worse. There's a lot of even historical context, like a thing we were talking about in Romania, where this precedent can easily become massive. And I don't know. It's scary. It's not just as simple as saving some fetuses. It's life or death for a lot of people, and it's not a joke.
Yeah,
well, and that's
it really isn't.
It's funny that you hear against Obamacare is given the government the power over your healthcare decisions, and damned if that's not what you're trying to do with some of these very extreme bills. I mean, you're giving the ultimate power in this case to impose the death penalty over someone who was raped or a victim of forced incest, not wanting to have the child. I mean, you can't step in their shoes, man. And power to make that decision. Give me Obamacare out of the two. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. It's definitely not a good precedent to set. And there's historical and even current evidence of this all over the world. Remember, I guess, when it comes to the moral and political divide, is that you can have that compromise. You can be morally pro-life. You can be morally anything and not want the government involved. And I think we need to come together on is we don't want government involvement in things that they're not already involved in. So why are we advocating for more government involvement in this than they already have? That's just asinine to me. And especially when we look economically, libertarians are pretty anal about looking at everything through an economic lens. Economically, abortion bans don't make any sense. So moving on, why should political debates focus solely on legality? And legislative bans don't have the desired effect, and they usually do more harm than good. Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico have outright abortion bans across the board. Some of them have exceptions, some of them don't. Guatemala in their constitution, granting the right to life from conception. Prior to 1973, abortion was outlawed without exception, even for the life of the mother. That was changed to include the one exception for life of the mother, and terms for both the mother and the one performing the abortion are in place. Since then, there have been between 60 and 80,000 abortions per year, with up to half of them requiring hospitalizations for complications is between 25 and 30 abortions per 1,000 women, and the unintended pregnancy rate is about 66 in 1,000 women. And that means nearly half of all unintended pregnancies result in an abortion, despite their the complication rate is over 100 times higher than the complication rate in the U.S., where, despite some rather restrictive states, abortion is still legal with access to safe procedures.
Well, I mean, that makes perfect sense. You're going to restrict it. It's kind of like we hear conservatives and libertarians make the argument that it's the restrictive gun laws in Chicago that have led to it being the most murderous city in the country. Restrictive abortion law in Guatemala, for example, and you see the complication rates 100 times higher, you're not stopping the abortions. You're just making them more dangerous. You're making it more deadly. Your good intentions are killing more people. It's right. The same damn argument.
No, an easy counter argument for that, though, is that it's only hurting the people who tried to kill what, in their point of view, is an innocent person.
Yeah, and despite what I said earlier, intentions. I think that a woman should die or a woman should be subject to complications after an abortion because she's a murderer is just a morally reprehensible position, and I can't.
I mean, I agree with you. I'm with you.
It's the equivalent of thugs and drags that are dying in Chicago. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, do you value life or do you not? Because, I'm going to tell you, I've read up on the Bible and Jesus hung out with those same drags. So are we saying that their lives are less valuable? Just shut up because you don't value life at all. And I realize that's kind of falling into the same trap of an extreme argument. But I mean, if you're going to start cherry picking which lives are more important, your argument kind of falls apart.
Yeah, and I've seen that justification used. Well, they deserve the complications. I don't care what happens to women if they're getting an abortion. They deserve it. There's no way to argue around that. Like, I just have to hang it up there. Like, I'm sorry, we can't continue this conversation because I don't see that that's any kind of justification for ignoring this information. So
no.
So back to these stats, half of all unintended pregnancies result in an abortion. I found that one shocking when I was doing the research for this.
Great, because I wouldn't have a clue.
Ours is at about 27% overall. So 27% of unintended pregnancies end in abortion in the U.S.
So more people are having abortions there.
More people are having an abortion there. Because it's a taboo subject. There's other factors in place too. It's largely a poverty-stricken country, so they don't have wide access to, birth control, contraceptives. A lot of that here in the U.S. in more poverty-stricken states like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, even Tennessee have much higher abortion rates in those states, and they actually have a much as well. They actually topped Guatemala and these other countries, coming in at almost 75 per 1,000 for the unintended pregnancy rate. I mean, it makes sense. Just because of abortion bans, there's other factors that go into that, with it being a poverty-stricken country. So, you can see that the ban doesn't really have any effect on abortion as a whole. People are still getting the abortions as the U.S. where it's legal. So you're not curbing abortion at all, but you are raising the complication rate by 100 times at least. I mean, the evidence is right there that these bans do not work. This is countrywide. It's not.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Another thing that comes with giving the state power in this area is miscarriage investigations. It sounds kind of crazy, but we don't have to imagine what it will look like. Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico all have women investigated for early terminations of pregnancy. And termination here, to get the definition out of the way, would just be the spontaneous ending of a pregnancy. It doesn't mean just miscarriage. It just means the end. So any kind of early end of a pregnancy.
Like an accident or like
exactly.
an illness. It could be whatever.
And as expected from a government agency, the injustice is rampant. Thousands of women are charged with the crime of abortion after a miscarriage or some other obstetric emergency. The law around abortion is so severe that even women who painfully or traumatically lose their pregnancies wind up being accused of trying to do so on purpose. A woman who seeks medical care after a miscarriage to prove that she didn't attempt an abortion on her own varies widely throughout the country and often depends on local authorities. It's common for doctors and other hospital staff to report women to local authorities and seek medical care after a miscarriage because of the liability involved for them as medical providers. They don't want to be involved or accused of aiding in an abortion, so to avoid any potential criminal prosecution and jail time, they essentially expect law enforcement to sort it out.
Wow.
Yeah. A recent
That's
study
absolutely disgusting.
It is. A recent study from Centro Las Libres de Information, an advocacy organization that focuses on at least 4,118 women in Mexico were charged with the crime of abortion between 2000 and 2017. Researchers and advocates say it's likely that many of those women had miscarriages, but were turned over to Mexico before they even received full medical care. The problem is, it's nearly impossible to tell if a pregnancy spontaneously ended due to miscarriage or abortion, unless the abortion used drugs, which trace amounts can be found if tested. But most abortions or home abortions are not caused by using the drug. If a medical doctor can't tell if it's a miscarriage or abortion or give a reason, a documented reason for a miscarriage, they're open to the state. A medical doctor can't determine it, so they expect a government law enforcement agency to determine the cause of a miscarriage or if a woman is liable. How does that make sense in any universe?
I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it.
Somewhere somebody's sitting there like, damn, that's a great idea.
These are like the laws now?
Yeah, these are the laws right now in Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador.
You'd think Republicans would be trying to import Mexicans.
Somewhere somebody's like, well, wait a minute about that wall, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd be placing tariffs on importing Mexicans to pay for the wall.
That's insane to me that, women are prosecuted for miscarriages because they can't prove. I wanted to give some general abortion stats. It's kind of relevant to the miscarriage side of things. So from 2006 to 2015, abortion rates have dropped 24% in the U.S. They've gone down 24%. Less abortions than they used to. 91.1% of abortions are performed in the first trimester, 12 weeks. 25% of abortions are chemical abortions, meaning the abortion pill was used in place of a surgical procedure. 1 in 3 have had an abortion in their lifetime.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, I did not think that would be that high.
Yep. 1 in 3 women in the U.S. have had an abortion in their lifetime, and only 30% of those women have had more than one. So this notion people seeking abortions are using them as a form of birth control and have repeat abortions is just not the case. It's only 30% of women who have had more than one, and only 10% of them that have had more than two. So it's a very small number of people abortions and use them as a form of birth control. And I do condemn that. I don't morally, personally, I don't believe that that is a good thing to do. I don't like that people use abortion as a form of birth control.
I would imagine anyone paying for it out of their own pocket, though. And
well, yes, and you go to
Not
Planned Parenthood, and you're not, getting just a free abortion. That's not the case. It's kind of a misconception on the pro-life side. It's not just the you still have to pay quite a bit.
Right, and that's what I mean is nobody wants to or can afford to just shell out a fucking abortion fund every time they want to go on Tinder either. You know what I mean? It's not.
Fail. Nothing is 100%. The only thing that's 100% is abstinence. But we're human beings. We have biological and instinctual urges and desires and needs to go out and procreate. I mean, you can preach abstinence and say that that's the best way to go, and it works for some people, but, it's not going to be the only thing that works, because people are still going to go out and have sex. It's just going to happen. We have to accept that fact. Pretending that human nature is just going to change overnight. People are just going to magically stop having sex because someone told them that abstinence was the best form of birth control. It just doesn't work like that. Human nature doesn't just change on a dime. Most, shocking statistics that I found while doing research for this podcast. 8 out of 10 pregnancies end and do not result in a birth.
Wow.
Really shocking to me.
Really?
That's
up to 5 of them, or 5 out of 10, and in the first 4 weeks, and that's known as a chemical pregnancy because most people don't even know that they're pregnant. And now 4 weeks gestation, 4 weeks gestation is equal to actual, fertilized life. It's before it even implants in the uterus, which happens about 2 weeks after fertilization. You don't even know you're pregnant, and it just ends. So that's a lot of them.
Wow.
4 million babies are born. That means that there are 20 million pregnancies resulting in only 4 million births. And abortions account for only 0.5% of those pregnancies that didn't result in a birth. At 6 weeks, an embryo, which is about the size of half a pea. And that's when a lot of these bans are going in place, is about 6 weeks. Yeah, it's literally the size of half a pea. And the heartbeat that they're referring to in these bills is actually just electrical impulses from the beginning. It's not a fully formed human heart. And the embryo also has no brain and is just beginning to form a spinal cord. So these are not these little fully formed miniature humans. And I hate to use the term clump of cells because it's not a clump of cells. It's very life. It has its own DNA. I'm not denying that it is life. It is, but it's not a fully formed human. But getting back to the stats here. Yeah, I found the 8 to 10 pregnancies end and do not result in a birth thing to be and
that like broke my brain.
That's mind blowing.
That's crazy.
Yes, and only 0.5 of those are abortions, so it's only about 1 million. It's less than 1 million now. The rate is about 850, which is really a drop in the bucket for all of the pregnancies. But when you take that information,
it does feel like a really high number, though. That's high. If I had to guess how many there would be, I would have thought it would be less.
So
maybe I'm just.
So taking this information and applying it to what we learned about what's happening in Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador, that's 16 million potential investigations into miscarriages.
It's a lot of government.
15 million if that's an estimate. So 15 million miscarriages every year.
You know what, we can compromise, and we could, all those investigations could be AOC's federal jobs guarantee program. They could investigate.
You know what?
The bipartisanship works.
But can you imagine, though, if
that's
the miscarriage police actually started to be a thing, you'd have 15 million potential miscarriages that might... One of those 15 million is going to get cleared of all wrongdoing.
They would need to create an agency for that. They literally would have to. It would be a big deal.
It would be a huge deal, and it would be opening up women to a lot of scrutiny that really they don't even have the capability to prove that it was a miscarriage and not an abortion, because even a lot of medical doctors can't give you a cause for miscarriage. It's just a thing that happens, and a lot of people, there's only maybe 20 documented causes. The rest is just like, it just happens sometimes.
Another thing, too, is there are women that, struggle to have kids for, years and years and have miscarriages. And, they just want to... Could you imagine going to have kids and having a miscarriage and being upset about one, you're not getting the child that you've been praying for, and now also you got to get investigated by the feds because you had a miscarriage.
And I think that's kind of worst case when it comes to legislation and discussing legislation. You have to take those worst case scenario things into account. Who do you think is going to be affected by this the most? Do you really think it's going to be the rich people, or is it going to be the lower income people who are already affected by so much and can't afford, that prenatal care to ensure that they have documentation of their miscarriage? Or there's so many things that go into this that you would need to get cleared, that it's going to disproportionately affect.
No question.
So
this actually raises... I actually have a question now that's kind of backtracking about the other countries. But let's say a person in one of those countries, woman was pregnant and smoking and had a miscarriage. Would that be self-inflicted abortion?
It depends on the country. Guatemala, yes. Guatemala has a very detailed criminal code. So if it's something that was, the mother was negligent and it resulted in a miscarriage, she can go to qualify as negligence. So yes.
All right. Sorry for backtracking.
No, it's actually a good point. When it comes to, punishment, when it comes down to the woman, there's a lot of these things that are just kind of left up in the air. What if a woman does this? Or what if a woman does that?
Really easy to say, all right, I hate abortion, ban it. So, let's say hypothetically we did. Would you ban it? Now what? People don't really think about, the ins and outs of, how long are you going to send her in prison because she couldn't have a kid. It's really interesting. other countries, especially Mexico. I didn't think that it would be like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's, hate to say it, but it's kind of a shithole.
You might catch some shit for that one.
Probably, but that's fine. Back to the general brain activity that can be monitored on an EEG or a brain activity scan only begins at 25 weeks gestation, far into the second trimester.
I found something that can counter that today, though. Surgically, we're performing a surgical abortion and did the EEG on the fetus at 45 days, they could detect brainwaves.
Yes, they do have brainwaves way before this, but until and can be monitored for more than just random spikes, that begins at 25 weeks. So there are, brainwaves beforehand, not any kind of conscious thought. It's just random spikes. But 25 weeks is when they become constant, and that's when you can say there's definitely life there. And only 5% of abortions overall are performed after 25 weeks, and those are for medical necessity.
Yeah, I don't imagine pregnancy and just decide they don't want to have a kid.
No, and that's kind of the thing too, is doctors can definitely turn down abortions. They can say, absolutely, I will not do this. And when it comes to late term, third trimester, you have board approval. You have to go before the board of the hospital or the board of the practitioner, you're saying, to get approval for this. Knowing all of those stats and knowing that there's still solutions that need to be proposed that don't include, not going to legislate it, and that's our position. We have to propose other solutions to it. So the first recorded history of abortions being practiced was in 1550 BC in a medical text, and that text referred to the procedure being formed as early. That's 5,000 years of abortions happening. It's naive to think that a law of all things in 2019 is going to stop. This is one part of the abortion
Well, we
topic.
got rid of straws, right?
Right. Part of the abortion topic that we can look at economically. The basic laws of supply and demand are something that we hold as truth in everything. It's as dear to economics and human behavior as any one principle could be. If you take away the legal supply of something, but don't address the demand, you have a situation where those with the demand are going to seek out the supply in any way possible, regardless of legality. Now that leads to numerous outcomes, including medically dangerous situations, Mexico, Guatemala, exploitation, etc. It also demonstrates that cutting off legal supply doesn't have the desired effect of stopping abortion. Also, as you can see, in Guatemala and any other country that has ever banned abortion issue, we do so by tackling the reasons women have abortions. That's getting to the A-class problem, so to speak, instead of addressing it with blanket bans, which are a C-class solution. Now, the following dilemma is what leads to abortions. A developing embryo or fetus is not viable, and the mother wants it out of her uterus. It's as simple as that. But no, it's not the mother wants to kill it. She simply wants the pregnancy to end. As of right now, inevitably the only option before viability at around 22 to 25 weeks. But what if that wasn't the case? What happens once we have the technology to remove it from her without killing it and let the pregnancy continue? This would radically shift the abortion discussion and separate death and morality from the act of abortion. It would just become another medical procedure that wasn't hotly contested because there's no death aspect. This artificial womb is called wombs are a possible solution to the abortion issue. It would still technically be an abortion because it would unequivocally end the pregnancy, but the fetus would be able to continue development in the artificial womb with the help and constant monitoring of medical. Testing has shown success in animals with a fetal lamb surviving for weeks in an artificial womb in 2017. Also being developed is fetal transfer. This would entail taking the fetus from a mother and transferring it or a surrogate womb. So this would just take it from one woman to another, and it would be able to continue development. This technology would still allow a fetus to be delivered and transferred to the willing surrogate. So no, still is an abortion, and it still ends the pregnancy of the woman seeking the abortion, but the baby lives. This biotechnology, both the fetal transfer and the ectogenesis, is still in developmental stages and won't be viable for another 10 years, for several decades. So I see a lot of people taking, the ectogenesis route as a, I guess, one-size-fits-all solution. And, end of discussion, we have artificial wombs. We don't have artificial wombs. We don't have them yet. They're still being tested. There's still a solution that's going to be viable for decades. But it is something to definitely keep an eye on. If you're pro-life, this is going to be something that's going to completely change the murder aspect of abortion. This is kind of the solution to it. And it won't be for a long time. Other solutions would be making birth control over the counter. That's something that, right now you have to go to a doctor and get a prescription. That's a lot of money, especially if you don't have health insurance. Primary care physician is damn near impossible without health insurance. Getting that prescription is damn near impossible, and then paying for it, paying the copay or paying for the prescription itself, paying for the doctor, it's not a big deal to go and get a birth control script, but making it more widely available, making it available over the counter, just as you would get Tylenol, that would go a long way towards helping women have that contraception beforehand. So these unwanted pregnancies, that's addressing the demand.
Yeah, and it's also a beautiful conservative solution because, hey, I hear a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't force me to pay for somebody else's birth control. No, let's let them pay for it, but let's make it more expensive. Huge win.
It takes a lot of deregulation from the FDA, a lot of reforming patent laws, stuff like that. Just deregulation.
Less government.
Really don't have to spend any money on it at all.
Right.
You just take some laws out and you're good. To
huge
stemming unwanted pregnancies, also education. We have to keep educating people on contraceptive methods. We have to make sure people know. This is a fun fact about birth control. It becomes ineffective whenever you don't know. But
really?
Educating people on birth control methods, letting them know, hey, if you get sick or if you skip 1 or 2 days, your birth control is ineffective. It's not going to work and you have a higher chance of getting pregnant. As a for a young woman to opt in for a sterilization procedure, whether permanent or reversible. If you're under 30 and have less than 3 kids, most doctors will not perform the procedure, or they will require a husband's permission altogether. It's pretty shocking that in 2019, these attitudes would persist in the medical community. But speaking from experience as a 27-year-old with 2 kids, I was denied the procedure. It's a widespread unwanted pregnancies. And it's a simple fix, too. All you have to do, really, is just allow women to make these decisions before it leads to a situation where they're forced to deal with the ramifications of an unwanted pregnancy. Doctors literally just need to make their decisions, work with them on that decision, and if they don't want to do it, refer them to someone who will. Another one would be fixing the adoption system.
Well, my 3 boys are adopted. It wasn't I don't know what the current laws are, but I know in the past there were roadblocks, say, if it was a homosexual couple, there were places that prevented that. I don't know, there still may be any type of artificial roadblock. I think that pro-lifers can do is advocate for adoption to be an option for the parent, for the person who's giving birth. But damn, you've got to make it easier for people to adopt. That's another place where due diligence on any couple that wants to adopt. But once it gets to the point where it's prohibitive to the adoption, it's more unnecessary bureaucratic red tape, more government being the problem.
The adoption process is difficult. If you can get in with an agency and, find a family ahead of time, that's great, but that's not the majority of cases. The majority of babies put up for adoption go into go through an agency. They don't go to families immediately. There's over 1 million kids in the foster care system. They're backed up, and it's difficult to adopt out of foster care. I mean, my family has adopted children out of foster care. It can take that, and not a lot of people are willing to go through that for years.
Right.
So you have to simplify the process. You have to deregulate the adoption market and make it to where, you know, these adoption agencies and these adoptions can go through fair and set up their own vetting processes for who's adopting and whatnot. But just making that process easier from the government regulation standpoint would go a long way to making that more widely available and a more easy option to choose.
No doubt. That, you know, you hear all kinds of horrid cases of, you know, foster parents abusing foster children. It seems it's really easy to foster a child, but when you're a loving, make them your own, that's where you start bringing in the red tape. It's ass backwards.
Definitely. There's a lot of things we can do to address the demand. You know, like we said, this is the one part of abortion and the debate. Supply and demand. Very simple. You can't take away supply without addressing demand. You know, you have your ectogenesis, you have your fetal transfer in the future. Right now we have birth control methods and education methods in the adoption system, and anything that you can do to help a woman who is thinking about abortion, anything you can do to help them in their situation. If it's, you know, they're a poor, struggling college student who, come up with a way to address that. Come up with a way to maybe offer free childcare for those in college. You know, address the concerns that they have, or else they're going to go for the easiest option. I mean, economically, the easiest, because I know that these are really hard decisions for a lot of people.
Do something other than throw rocks at them and call them murderers. That would be a great first step. I mean, I sympathize strongly with the pro-life side, but viable alternative. You can't just say, no, you can't have an abortion, because that's, as the stats in Guatemala show, that's not going to stop abortions. It's just going to make them more unsafe. Try to appeal to other angles. You know, I think there are organizations who take that approach, and I don't have statistics in front of me on them, but, you know, it seems to definitely be a more favorable way to go, results-wise.
Yes.
And I sympathize with the pro-life side of it, but damn, man, you just can't say, no, you can't do it, because that does nothing.
Yes, much like we see when they ban anything else. And
Amen.
I get that this is different because there's quote-unquote human life involved. Appreciate the difference, and I'm not just going to mindlessly compare the two, you know, the drug war and abortion, but the effect of banning is the same.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up here with, you know, talking about discourse. You know, we've mentioned an episode about discourse surrounding abortion and how it can be really toxic and what you can do to kind of change the tone. But something, you know, that really struck out to me is the vast majority of people don't come from a place of hatred or have malice. They think is best based on their own moral and ethical codes. Some place more value on the mother, some place more value on the unborn, and some hold them as equals. Even if you disagree with someone on where they place that value, you can't deny that they're placing value on what they believe in. They have good intentions. You can fight for what you believe in without convincing yourself the other side is hateful or murderers or only trying to control women. Staying grounded during these emotionally charged discussions is important. Is intellectual honesty and honest reflection. Leave your assumptions and generalizations aside. Listen to people as individuals with their own unique perspective and opinions. Don't throw around insults and generalized retorts without understanding their arguments. Insults in general, really. You may get a lot of retweets or Facebook shares for a witty insult to the other side, but the only thing that does is solidify the other side's position. Both sides see one or two opinions and assume that's what everyone's. So you get a lot of support from your own side, but you're turning the other side even further away because they see you as someone who doesn't want to listen and doesn't care to work on solutions, only sling more mud and further the divide. Staying intellectually honest position and arguments can show that there are good faith arguments for your position. And that's the first step towards possibly changing some minds. You're not likely to change someone's moral position on the matter, but changing someone's political position is more about legislative bans and their effects, and stay civil, open-minded, and leave the emotional vitriol out of the discussion. Intentionally divisive talking points turns a really gray area topic into strictly black and white for most people involved. People into reactionary talking heads, consistently spewing the same tired tropes back and forth and getting nowhere on actual solutions. We have to remain level-headed, and we have to try and curb our own emotions. So we ran pretty... I feel like a lot of the information was really important, so I do apologize for the super long episode that you're probably not used to. But I hope that you took something away from this and can maybe pass this along, or at least go out and maybe have a civil discussion next time instead of yelling at people. Before we go, we just want to remind our listeners to check out Think Liberty on all social media platforms. Just search Think Liberty on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and any other platform. Our website is think-liberty.com. Before you're done listening, subscribe to the Think Liberty Podcast Network for almost daily uploads of new shows, leave us a review, and tell a friend. I appreciate everyone's time this week, and whether you like it or not,